Hello there, it's Antrice, and welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter Podcast. The Savvy Painter Podcast is published every week on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. If you are a painter or artist who is looking for down-to-earth, real-life conversations about art, how to create it, how to sell it, you are in the right place. Savvy Painter has been downloaded over 1 million times by artists in 150 countries. This is the place where you will find your community, you will be inspired to create, and you'll hear real stories from artists who are thriving with their art. So if you are new to this podcast, I want to welcome you to the Savvy Painter community. But make sure you don't miss an episode. Sign up for weekly updates, free guides, and workshop announcements. Go to savvypainter.com/subscribe. It's that easy. This week, my guest is Kelli Vance. Kelli is a figurative artist from Texas. She got her BFA from the University of North Texas in Denton and her MFA from the University of Houston. Kelli grew up looking at symbolist paintings. Her work harkens back to the same ideologies, that art should reflect an emotion or idea rather than strictly the natural world. Her current paintings of women explore spirituality and invite the viewer to decipher their meaning. In this episode, we talk about where her ideas come from, how she brings her vision to life by inviting friends to model for her, and her faith that the work will always find its audience as long as she's persistent. Kelli and I also talk about what it is that makes her want to just rip into a painting as soon as she gets into the studio. Museum trips and outdoor excursions are part of what feed her enthusiasm for painting. She is a girl after my own heart, a total book nerd who keeps a running list of quotes and phrases just in case she needs a title for a painting. So before we jump in, I just want to tell you that if you're listening to this episode the very same day it came out, you can wish Kelli a happy birthday and congratulate her on her upcoming wedding. I hear there's a bachelorette party tonight in Texas. So happy birthday and cheers to you, Kelli. Kelli, welcome to the Savvy Painter Podcast. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm excited as well.
Tell me a little bit about how you got started. I'm always curious about the artists that people look at when they were younger and thought, I want to do that.
Well, it actually wasn't until I was in college, an undergrad. I went to the University of North Texas, which is north of Dallas and Denton, Texas. And that's when I decided that I wanted to kind of dedicate my life to art. But I think when I was younger, I did go to the museum a lot, the Dallas Museum of Art. It's a great, great place. And I think seeing the surrealist work there at the museum had a huge impact on me because I could recognize that they were taking these kind of everyday objects and using them in these really interesting ways that undermined, our commonly held perceptions of how things exist in the world. And that was just really interesting, even when I was younger, even though I didn't really totally understand what it was that they were doing, but I could recognize that it was something that was really intriguing. I think it was Magritte. There's a really cool saying of Magritte that he said that the mind loves the unknown and it loves images whose meaning is unknown.
Yeah.
And I really believe that to be true. So those paintings were always intriguing to me as a young person, and they still are today, because I live in Houston. So I can go to the Manil collection here and see some of the most fabulous, works of surrealism that have ever been made. And they inspire me every time I look at them to be just more open, I think, to possibilities in painting and to art making. So psychologically, I think those paintings, those surrealist works, and some of my works, I guess, tap into elements of the unconscious and investigate perceptions of reality, something I'm really, really interested in.
Wow, that is so cool. And I love that. I'm sure, I doubt, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure or I doubt it if, but let me rephrase that. Let me not put words in your mouth. When you were looking at that as a kid, you recognized the creativity of it, or were you actually thinking, kind of those deeper psychological thoughts?
I think at that time, I definitely wasn't having any deeper connection to them, but I was recognizing that they were doing something totally different than what I would see in the world around me all the time. And as a kid, I really enjoyed making drawings. I would draw all the time. I used to go around actually in my neighborhood, my parents' neighborhood where I was growing up, and draw all the flowers in the neighborhood and make these books that I would give to my mom for Mother's Day. It was hilarious. And I would actually find out what the flowers were called and like label them and kind of make these.
Oh my God, you sound like the biggest nerd in the world.
I was a total nerd.
And I feel totally comfortable saying that too, because that is exactly something that I would have done.
Yes, it's so good. I know. I tell my students this story sometimes, and they're like, "Wow, that's really nerdy." I'm like, I know, it's fine.
It kind of reminds me of my friend and I no idea what book it was, but let's say it was at that time period, the equivalent of Harry Potter, although Harry Potter didn't exist. It was some book on, magical, mystical things, and they gave the potion. They listed all the ingredients of the potion, and there was a botanical gardens within biking distance of our houses. So we rode our bikes to that place and went on a hunt for all of the ingredients.
Oh my gosh, I love it. I love it. I would have done this. This is something I would have done.
So that's why I'm totally comfortable saying, oh my God, Kelli, you're such a nerd, and I love you for it.
Thank you. I love it.
So you tell your students that these are the things that you used to do?
Yeah, they always ask me questions about just, how I started making paintings or drawings and, what my life plan was kind of, going into college, and because they're trying to figure all that stuff out too. Yeah. So I'm honest with them, and I tell them all these like little quirky things, and it makes them feel more, I think, at ease with their kind of transition into either being a painting major or just trying to figure out life. So I tell them all these things and they have fun with it.
Oh, that's great. So what happened in college that made you make that jump?
It's a topsy-turvy kind of path, I think. I went in actually as intending to be a pre-med student. I really loved biology and anatomy, and that was kind of my jam. And I really loved psychology too. I took a ton of psychology courses. But then, I don't know, I took a painting class, and it was just a game changer. I was hooked. I'd never painted before that. Like I said, I was always drawing. Uh-huh. And I remember being pretty terrible at painting, actually, when I took that class. Yeah. I was bad. I was really bad. So I could draw, and I still love drawing, but there was something about these challenges that painting gave to me that really sucked me in. And it became so interesting and fun. And, and since it was this kind of whole new world, I had absolutely no frame of reference as far as like what was considered good.
Yeah.
So I really, put myself out there and just didn't hold back. And if it was going to fail, it was going to fail like really, really hard, like really well.
Right. If I'm going to fall, it's going to be spectacular.
Yeah.
That's hilarious because I had the exact same experience. I was totally going for pre-med, and I refused to take any art classes in high school because it wasn't pre-med, and that's what I knew I was going to do, and blah, blah, blah. And then I took an art class and just completely fell in love with it. For me, and same thing, like I had zero painting. Like my paintings were so god awful.
Have you shown those to anybody?
Unfortunately or fortunately, my mom, the Museum of Antrice is officially located in my mom's living room. And
nice. I love it.
So I'm sure those paintings have been, as much as I've tried to get her to get rid of them, I'm sure they're carefully preserved somewhere.
Yeah, they are.
So for me, it was the color class. What was it for you that just made you go that, I don't know if it's the same experience that I had, but it was just like something, it was like physically grabbed me from inside and was like just that pure, passionate love. It was almost like falling in love. It was just like, oh my God.
Yeah. I remember the assignment actually. It was a beginning painting class. And the assignment actually wasn't that creative, but it was you had to take the same image, like whatever image you wanted, and basically paint it in acrylic and paint one in oil. And you had to abstract that image somehow. And I just remember taking the oil paint and trying to abstract this clock that I found this image of. And it was just, to me, for some reason, the most just enjoyable and just awesome experience to make this abstracted clock painting. And that's what did it. And I was just, this is it. This is so awesome. And I just never knew what paint could do. Mm-hmm. And so making that painting was what propelled me to just want to keep making paintings.
I love it.
It's so weird. It's like the most boring assignment possible, but it totally worked.
Yeah, I don't know. Mine was like, It was a color assignment. So we basically had to make a collage out of colors from magazines. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, fortunately, she at least told us, don't pick gradients, pick something that's a flat color, cut it out. So we made a collage, and then you had to mix acrylic colors, match them perfectly to whatever it was, whatever the pieces that you cut out, and actually put the paint on top of the collage, and you were supposed to not be able to see the paint because you matched the color so perfectly. So of course I made this really intricate, crazy collage. Most other people, there was like 8 shapes in there and I had like 50.
Oh my gosh. But I bet that was really satisfying to like match all those colors and lay them on top. I can just imagine that. That was really nice.
Same thing that you're saying. It's like on the surface, that's the most boring, awful assignment. And I loved it every second of it. I'm like, oh my God, this is so cool. And it dries darker. And if you do this, it does that. And just like completely head over heels in love.
Yeah. And you just learn a lot, right? In that process.
Exactly.
This moment of discovery, like with every step you take, there's just something totally different and new. Yeah. It's just really exciting.
Totally. So tell me what happened and I'll stop. I'm just like this is weird that I feel like we're having like the same exact experiences. So I'm kind of like, whoa, doctor, huh? And then when art class changed everything, huh? Uh-huh. Oh, and a really geeky assignment? That's really interesting. So did you then have to, or like, were you in the position where you had to say, hey, mom, dad?
Yep. Oh yeah. There was some not so happy thoughts that came from that. Yeah. They were actually really supportive eventually. Uh-huh. But yes, there was that time where I was just, guess what? No pre-med for me. And then they were like, oh, and your career goes down the toilet. But it was fine. There was some tenseness there, but they got over it pretty quickly when they saw how committed I was to it. Mm-hmm. So then it was totally fine after that.
So tell me about after college. What happened? How did you transition from being a student into being I'm giving you air quotes, professional artist?
Well, I guess after undergrad, I obviously decided to go to grad school. So I came to the University of Houston, did that whole thing. And then I feel like I learned so much in grad school. I think because I started so late in the game, I felt like you, I didn't take art classes in high school. I got into it in college and I felt so far behind compared to other people there that had been learning about art and making art, since freshman year of high school. And I just felt like grad school was such a great learning opportunity. And I started showing my work at a gallery my last year of grad school. So that was really exciting. So I felt like I was starting to transition into, I guess, the real art world before I even got out of school, which was exciting and terrifying at the same time. And so it was kind of a lot of pressure, I felt, but I think I handled it okay. And then after that, after school, I applied for the Roswell artist residency program. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not. Tell me about it.
Oh my gosh, it's so fantastic. It's a year-long residency.
Whoa.
And in Roswell, New Mexico, which is out in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere.
Isn't that where the aliens are supposed to be hiding?
Yes.
Okay.
Uh-huh. There are aliens. If you go down the street, the downtown area, the street lamps have the lights on top are alien heads. So they're so good. It's amazing. I'm not kidding. And they have an alien museum there. It's great. So it's a year-long residency program, and it's a rolling application deadline. So at any given time you're there with, I think, around 8 other artists, I think was the number, and you each have your own house and studio attached to the house.
Whoa.
Yeah. And a common area in the middle of this kind of campus out in the desert. And it's a year long, and they pay you the entire year to give you a stipend so you could just work. It's the most amazing thing, and hardly anyone knows about it. So it's crazy to me because it's an internationally recognized place. I mean, they accept people from all over the world. So you just meet amazing people that are so committed to making what they're making, and you just spend the whole year getting to know them and working together and making your own work. And it's just, that time I felt like I went through 3 years worth of ideas and work in the matter of a year, because that's all you get to do. It was amazing.
Wow. That is great. That sounds like heaven.
Yeah. So anyone listening, Roswell artist residency program. Apply. It's awesome. They like painters.
Oh my God. I have a feeling they're going to get flooded. If I could think of any possible way to convince my husband to take off for a year. Okay. So everybody out there, you got to do this just for me and tell me how it was. So 3 years. So you're saying like the amount of, I can imagine that too, because you're just so focused and you have the sort of the energy of all these other people that's just you're feeding off of each other. What were some of your biggest takeaways from that time that you spent there painting?
I think from there, I used the landscape a lot. Up until that time, my paintings they're figurative paintings, and at that time, there were women in these interior spaces. Mm-hmm. And so when I moved out there, I did a few more pieces that involved these domestic spaces, but I really was inspired by the landscape. And actually, I think that every artist that went out there in some way or another was inspired by the landscape of New Mexico. I mean, it's just beautiful. It's like impossible not to be. So my paintings actually started to kind of take place or take set in the landscape there. And the colors started changing, the forms and the paintings started changing. So I think it really did affect my work a lot. And I ended up making, like I said, a lot of work, so much work in that time that I had enough to put myself out there for different shows at the same time, where I didn't feel like I was so pressured to like make work I didn't already have, right? So I could get them into shows.
Right.
So it just gave me an opportunity to have an amount of work that was useful to apply for a lot of things at one time.
Nice. So where did you go from there?
From there, I moved to California for a little while, to Long Beach. So I was teaching at the Long Beach City College down there and showed at a gallery in Los Angeles for a little while. That was a really overwhelming experience when I look back, actually. I don't think I was quite ready to take advantage of that art scene there.
Uh-huh.
And I'm sure you're a California girl, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of know, I think you know what I'm talking about. I know it's not in LA, but yeah, it was a little overwhelming there, but I managed to have a show out there and teach a little bit before I moved back to Houston.
Nice. Tell me a little bit about your paintings and what you're working on now.
Well, right now I'm working on a few things. I'm working on a series of paintings that I guess they really harken back to a lot of symbolist ideologies. I didn't set out thinking of the images in that way, but as I worked, there are definite ties to some of their ideas. The symbolist painters believed that art should reflect an emotion or idea rather than strictly the natural world. And that's something I'm really interested in, especially the emotional aspect of it, or definitely the psychological aspect of it. So the figures are now taking up this kind of spiritual sphere in the settings, and they're kind of, the images themselves are giving us these moments that these female figures are going through, and we have to kind of decipher what the meaning is. Mm-hmm. There are these scenarios with friends that I use as models, and we act out these certain moments.
What I think is really interesting is just this idea that, early on you were really interested in these sort of surrealist paintings. When I looked at your paintings, though, I did not really catch on to that sort of surrealist thing at all, to be honest.
Yeah, I had a few more contemporary, I think, influences when I started actually making paintings. Mm-hmm. Like when I started painting in undergrad, the artist that really got me excited about the figure and about painting was John Curran. If you're familiar with his work. Mm-hmm. I was like so taken aback by his stylization of the female form, because his paintings they're really appalling and also beautiful at the same time. And around the same time I was looking at him, I was looking at Lisa Yuskavage, and she had this really much more complex psychological spaces in her work that were really inspiring. And talk about like a mastery of color. She makes some stunning paintings. So those two painters, when I started actually painting, were the ones that really started influencing where I was going in the work. So that probably makes more sense when you look at some of them now.
So when you were talking about this more spiritual aspect of at least the motif or the content of your work, can you elaborate on that piece?
Well, I think my work, since I started kind of figuring out in grad school what I was really wanting to talk about, they were always about identity and about finding your identity somehow. And I guess it's about the complexities of how we form our identity and how we put an image out there of ourselves. So I think over time they started developing into these more, I guess, more personal scenarios.
When you mentioned that you use your friends as models. When you kind of like go, hey guys, come on over and we're going to do this thing.
I do.
How does that work?
Sure. Yeah. So once I start having these ideas, like I'll have images that kind of just pop into my head of, what kinds of motions or movements or moments I want to capture. So I always pick friends that I see as very strong females, like kind of strong to their core in a way. Mm-hmm. So I'll call them if however many I need, if I need 2 of them or 3 of them or 1 of them. I'll just say, hey guys, y'all up for this? You want to go take some photos? And they're always like, yes, like they love it because it's, it's just something they don't do all the time, so we'll go and I'll take them to, depending on the place becomes important for the photography aspect of it, even though I actually change the place most of the time when I paint them. But I feel like the last series I started working on, we went to a park out here where all the running trails are. And it just has this really interesting light that happens from the trees. And we went kind of at a little bit before dusk to capture this kind of, certain light atmospheric quality that was happening. Mm-hmm. And so I'll just print out images or make drawings of kind of the scenarios I'm envisioning. And I'll kind of explain it to them. And I'll ahead of time, like for this series, I'm having them all wearing different types of white dresses or white top. Mm-hmm. So I would go to Goodwill and go grab all the different dresses I could find that would work. And so we just kind of change out there and reenact these moments that I'm envisioning. And I'll just take hundreds of photographs and then go through and edit them and find the ones that work and then go from there and start figuring out how I'm going to make a painting from them.
Then do you start doing sketches from them, or are you using Photoshop to sort of arrange things or change the lighting, or do you just go straight into the painting?
Yeah, I'm not a big sketch person. I don't know why. I don't know why. I always feel like could be such an important step, but I do a lot of arranging in Photoshop. I don't change the lighting in there. Usually that just happens in the painting. Any of the changes I make, I just make them as I paint. But Photoshop really just kind of trying to find the composition is what I really use it for. And then I'll print it out and take it to the studio and then kind of go from there. And I'll either make a grid on the canvas because a lot of my paintings are pretty large scale.
What do you consider large scale?
66 by 90-ish, kind of in that range, or 48 by 80, things like that. So they get kind of large.
Yeah.
I really enjoy working largely. I feel like when I have a tiny brush and I'm just using my fingers and my hand to move, I can't get the expressiveness that I need for my whole arm to move.
Uh-huh.
So
yep.
Yeah, working larger for me, they just work better. Anytime I've tried to paint figures or faces smaller than life size, it just totally falls apart. It doesn't work. I can't, for some reason, connect with the image or connect with the emotional quality of the image that I'm trying to get. So they have to be bigger. So I just go big.
It's got to happen.
Yep.
Well, you are from Texas, right? So
right, everything's bigger in Texas.
Sorry, I know.
Probably not the best for sales, but it's kind of not the best when you're trying to move work. But that's the way I like to work. So
sorry, I know that's a cliche.
Oh, that's quite all right. I accept it.
Very cool. So I'd love to hear, can you tell me about a moment or a decision that you, looking back at it, you feel like was a personal success for you? And this can be something really, can obviously, like when I ask a question like that, people tend to think of like this big, giant, pivotal things, but sometimes it's the like super quiet moments, or a very small personal victory. I
think really moving back to Houston was important for me. As I said before, I was really overwhelmed by the art scene in LA at that time. And I was kind of lost and trying to figure out what I was making and just kind of going through a lot of personal stuff. And so coming back here, I felt like I could refocus and kind of get myself back together in a way. And there's a lot of opportunities here and a lot of connections to be made. I feel like coming back here to kind of restart, or I guess not restart, but really kind of focus and start my art career was really the right thing to do and really beneficial, because I think a lot of good things have come out of it.
On the flip side, can you share a story of when things didn't quite go so well, but more importantly, what you learned from it?
Well, I think everyday things don't go well sometimes in the studio. Like, it's really
getting up in the morning.
Let me narrow it down. No, on a larger stage, I think, I'm sure, and everyone goes through this, but you have shows sometimes that aren't financially successful.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel it personally, like the works weren't failures, but it's hard not to feel a little down when you work so hard to put these shows together, and then there's just like crickets, nothing, Yeah. So you have to remind yourself, and I remind myself, that my work is not for everyone, and just like anybody else, it's the same, it's true. And like any other work out there, it has to find its audience and its tastes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's motivating too, in a way, because it makes me want to expand my audience as much as possible and find ways to get my work out into the world on a larger scale. I'm still working on that part. But I think there is, I think from those moments you take away, you reach further and you don't feel discouraged by feeling like it's not working in this one particular place.
I love that, because, sorry, my voice just sounded like a teenage boy who's shifting.
And that's okay. I've been doing critiques like all day long as a student, so I'm like, my voice is pretty much toast.
So what I love about that is just the fact that when things don't go well, it seems like you take that as a signal to expand rather than contract.
Yes. And that's hard. For me, I had to convince myself of that, because it is so easy to be discouraged.
Oh, yeah.
And feel like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? I'm spending all this money and time and nothing's coming from it. And you just have to, kind of put your nose back to the grindstone and say, hey, this needs to go somewhere else, and it will find its audience. It will find a place in the world where it can exist and be appreciated, and you can keep making things.
Yeah. And that sounds so simple.
Yeah, but it's not.
It's really hard. You just summed that up in 30 seconds, 45 seconds, whatever it was. But that is a big deal. That is really, really hard. And it takes an enormous amount of faith and conviction and diligence to just keep going when there's no guarantees. You have no idea what's going to happen. Or, I feel like, I don't know, this might be a misconception of other people's careers, and it might be grass is always greener on the other side. But I think with most careers, you kind of know, like, if I do A, B, and C, then D, E, F, and G are going to follow, of course.
Yeah.
And for us, we kind of have to go, okay, A, B, C, D, and we're going to jump to X, Y, and then we're going to go, and then we're going to go back to F, whatever.
It's the most unpredictable way of living.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. And not only that, but it takes so long to develop the skills to learn who you are as an artist and to kind of come into maturity as an artist. And you have to be willing for not just a couple of years, but for decades to stick it out and have that faith that it will work out.
Yeah. Yes. My best friend, who's also a painter, and we always say that you have to live through the pain in painting to make it happen. You gotta find the pain in the painting.
That's right.
But it's true. It's like, it's all, you suffer for this stuff.
Yeah. And I sometimes wonder, do we have to suffer? Can we just let go of all that and say, okay, if I am committed to this, if this is, the thing that I will do no matter what, then all of that torture kind of comes from expecting it to be something it's not, or trying to be someone you're not.
Yes. We set up so many expectations for ourselves and for our work. And when you don't meet those, I think that's when it gets dangerous in some way to your sense of worth and your art and your sense of responsibility of making things. And it's hard.
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting to me, with all the people that I talk to for this podcast, that there are some people that they're competitive in some way, whether they want to be or not. And they're usually like, I don't think artists by nature are like super competitive, but within the range of competitiveness for an artist, they're competitive towards other people. And then there's, like myself, I'm super crazy, stupid, competitive against myself.
Right.
Right.
Like, yeah.
I don't really care what other people are doing, but I have super high expectations for myself.
Yes, I understand that completely. Completely. It's so funny. Yeah, because when we're in the studio making our work, we're so hard on ourselves. We're so hard on our work. And I think that can be a good thing, most of the time, unless it's not, unless it's detrimental to what you're doing. And it's so easy to look at other people's work and appreciate like the tiniest aspects of it that in your own studio would have been like, that's not right. Like, that's not going to work. Or that's stupid. Or, so it's so interesting how much pressure we put on ourselves in the studio.
Yeah. We magnify our own flaws and are perfectly willing to overlook other people's.
Yeah. Yep.
Which is, in a way why I think conversations with other artists and having other artists that you can talk to and just be around is so helpful, because it's kind of like, you've ever had that experience where you're really not just art, with anything, you're really struggling with something, and then you call a friend or somebody comes over and they're just like, well, why don't you just do this? And you're like, oh my God.
Yes. Yeah.
I love you and I hate you.
Yeah. And you get so caught up, with trying to like make it so much harder when you're doing that to yourself, and it's, you just can't see, you can't see that easiness.
Oh my gosh. That's so funny. So I know you are exploring spirituality in your work. I'm also curious, like, for painting as your vehicle to sort of express yourself, what is it that fascinates you about painting and keeps you inspired to keep going for all the years that it's taking? That just sounded awful. Like,
that's like for all this time.
Oh my God, Kelli, why are you still doing this? No, I don't mean it like that.
Funny.
But you know what I mean? Like, so you're not giving this up. You're in it for the long haul. Mm-hmm. And I know for myself, the things that keep me just absolutely fascinated and super excited to jump up and run into my studio and go paint. So I'm kind of curious, like, what are those things for you that just really get you?
I think obviously we are all constantly evolving and reacting to the world around us. So I think being tuned in to what is happening around me. I read a lot, and I like to read the news articles in the morning and things like that. And I mean, I don't make political work, but I'm definitely influenced and reactive to certain things happening in the world in my own work. But also, I think just going and traveling and seeing shows, and traveling not just to see art, but hiking and being outside. I think all those things are so beneficial as experiences to take back into the studio. And I know, like, I went last year to see the Kerry James Marshall show at the MoCA in Los Angeles. Oh, did you see it?
No.
You did? Yes? No?
No, I did not.
Oh my God.
I know, it kills me. Okay. So tell me about it.
That was a double trip. I went out there to see that show, and then I went to Sequoia to go camping and hiking. So
oh, wow.
It was like double.
And those are very contrasty, right? In the experience?
Yes. I'm a big outdoors person, though. So I get just as much inspiration from being outside and doing active things as I do from seeing art. So I try to make specific trips to go see shows and specific trips to go spend time outdoors. And both of those things, when I get back home, make me want to just rip into the studio as soon as I get there. Because I'll use photos sometimes of landscapes that I take when I'm traveling around, and I'll somehow infuse those into the paintings. So those kind of make it in there. And obviously, seeing shows at museums or galleries are just inspiring in their, own way, depending on what you're looking at and seeing.
Right. That reminds me, gosh, that was Alan Feltis. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he's now he's been living in, I think, since the 70s, I want to say, in Italy. But his big piece of advice for artists was do what you have to do to go see shows. Like, just make it happen.
Yep. I totally agree. I mean, it's just, even if you don't have the money, like, you just figure it out. You have, like, especially ones that are, I mean, I just knew I had to see that show.
Mm-hmm.
I love his work. And when I knew that it was there and I love California, I was like, all right, there's all these things there that I need, like, this has to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And so like anytime I go to Dallas, I'll go make a point to go see certain shows there. It's life-changing in a lot of ways. When you see these certain shows that just blow your mind and just blow you away and are so inspirational to your own practice. I mean, there's just nothing that compares to that. So I totally agree with that. You just have to do it.
What are some of the shows that you've seen that have really resonated with you or left a mark on you?
I saw a show last summer in London at White Cube, and it was a group show of a ton of feminist painters and artists. And there were people in there that were very contemporary, working right now, and all figurative images and paintings mixed with, these awesome sculptures from Louis Bourgeois, people like that. And it was just one of the most beautifully put together shows I've seen in a really long time. Super powerful imagery, and like risk taking in the way that they're approaching an image, I think, that I hadn't seen. And just the way that they were certain artists were approaching the figure, and the female figure in particular, and some of these works was something I had not seen before. So that one in particular was just mind blowing. I came home and I was just like so ready to get in the studio and figure out how all these things were going to come out in the work and what I was seeing and filtering. And yeah, that was an amazing show.
Nice. So this is a question I love to ask people, and it usually makes people squirm, and then Uh-oh, here we go. I tend to ask it towards the end, but I'm going to ask you now because it's a good segue. If you could own a piece of art by any living artist, what would it be, or whose?
That's an easy one. It is Vernon Fisher. He was a professor of mine actually at UNT when I was an undergrad. I only had him for one semester, and it really, really just breaks my heart now because I was so inexperienced at that time and too young to actually understand how amazing of an artist this man is. He totally reinvigorated my love for reading fiction. He made us all read the David Mitchell Cloud Atlas book for class, and it was just something I just never even thought about. I was new to painting, and he fuses literature and painting together in his works, and he's just really intelligent. So I feel like you gain some of that just by looking at his work. His paintings are amazing. So that would be the person I would pick.
You are the first person that didn't squirm on that question.
Oh man, no, it's funny because I came across some images of his paintings maybe a month ago. And I remember that I had a catalog of some of his work, and I was rereading it, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just totally forgot how much I love his works. And yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot, so that was easy. I was like, I want one.
That's so interesting. So I'm not familiar with his work, but how do you think that revival within you of this interest in fiction kind of dovetails does it dovetail into your work? Does it come into your work?
I think so. I mean, I read a lot, fiction and nonfiction. And when he turned me on to David Mitchell, I ended up reading every book that David Mitchell has written since then because I love his writing. And actually, I think it was maybe a few interviews ago, one of your guests had mentioned Haruki Murakami.
Uh-huh.
He was another author that I've read every book he's written. So it's all these people with magical realism, kind of in that genre. And I feel like some of my work has not super descriptive elements of that, but I think it has a kind of a feeling of that at moments. So I think it does seep in, and I take a lot of my titles from books. From whatever I'm reading, I'll just come across some really interesting, thought-provoking sentence and write it down. I have kind of a list of lines from books or articles that I'll find, and I just write things down, and those become titles at some point. So they get in there somehow.
Do you start with the title and create the painting, or do you do the painting and then kind of sift through those notes you have and pick one that works?
Yeah, I definitely make the painting first. The list of all the kind of potential titles is always there. So I might sift through at the end, but usually I'll end up finding one in the middle of making the painting, right? So I'll usually end up, because I'm reading kind of all the time too. And so I'll find something and be like, oh my gosh, that speaks to me at this moment with this image. And so usually I'll end up finding one in the midst of painting. But there have been times where I definitely go through and sift through at the end and kind of wonder, okay, what was it that I was reading at this time? What informed the images I was thinking about? And then I'll find something like that was it. And that's the title.
Interesting. What about music?
I like working in silence. I know that's so weird. Yeah, I really don't play music in the studio. I like to play music and when I'm not working, like anywhere else, if I'm driving or, in my house, things like that. But in the studio, for a while, I was trying to listen to podcasts all the time in the studio, but then I realized that I was paying more attention to the podcast and not to what I was doing, which could be good, but then it could also not be good, to kind of get lost. Yeah. But I was getting lost in the wrong way, if that makes sense.
It does.
So I had to stop. I had to stop listening to the TED Radio Hour during painting. But yeah, so I've found that I work better when I don't have any noise or any music going. I used to try to make these different playlists, that whatever mood I was in, maybe it would help kind of get me in a zone. But I've found that I get more lost in the painting when I don't have any other noises happening. So I end up usually working in silence. And dogs barking. And dogs.
Your dogs are not having this. Your dogs are like, I think from now on, if they ever hear my voice, they're just going to be like, grrr.
They're part of the studio practice. So they're feeling left out right now.
Understandable. Yeah, that's really interesting because my music choices are very situational and it really depends on at what point I am in the painting, whether I need music like rock and roll or whatever, the typical 3-minute song type with lyrics and loud banging something, or if it's long classical 20-minute songs, or if it's a podcast, or if it's complete silence. It completely depends on what the painting needs, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
So I get the silence part.
I think the only time I'll let music happen is if I'm like building a stretcher or stretching canvas or gessoing, because then it's like, that's just kind of automatic motions. You're not trying to get lost in that process, or at least I'm not. I don't enjoy it that much. So at that point, I could have something happening and it's fine. It kind of makes that pass a little bit faster. So
yeah.
But yeah, when the painting and drawing starts happening though, silence.
Yep. So I'm curious, Kelli, can you describe a single habit that you strongly believe contributes to your success as an artist or your growth as an artist?
I think it's just being constantly curious. I don't know if that's really a habit, but I think it might be. I love researching ideas and talking through them with friends and my artist friends. I'm lucky to have, I think, a really close friend and painter in particular that always listens and challenges me and vice versa. We have an awesome relationship in that way. So having those conversations, I think is really important. And I think we talked about that a little bit before. So I regularly kind of research and regularly talk about that research with certain people. So I think that habit of just constantly being aware of things around you and wanting to find out more and how they relate to your work and talking about those things, hashing them out, like that habit, I think contributes to development in so many ways.
Yeah. Curiosity is another one of those things that's so simple and yet so powerful, because if you start painting with the idea that you already know the answer or how it's going to turn out, I think you're kind of doomed. The painting is, so not you, the painting.
Yeah. And it becomes so monotonous at that point and I don't know, almost soulless, I guess, in a way.
Yeah. Is there a painting that you've done that you will always keep, that you would never give away, sell, or trade?
Never. None. I don't want any of my paintings ever around.
Really?
Yeah. Once they're done, I want them out of my my space.
Why?
I don't know. I think I do one and I want to keep going. And I feel like if I keep looking at them, then I'll start thinking of things that are wrong with them. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong, right? It's like I get to a point where it's finished and I know it's finished and I feel like I've accomplished what I wanted to accomplish with it. And if it's still there, I'll just go back and then I'll start overworking it, or I'll start nitpicking things out and just totally ruin the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I just need them out. I just need them away from me. So I think if I had a painting that I really loved and I had it hanging somewhere in my space, I think eventually it would become something I hated because I wouldn't leave it alone.
Oh my gosh. I wish I could remember which artist it was. It wasn't anybody I've interviewed. It's one of the greats, I guess, somebody who has books written about him. And because I read this in a book, but there's an artist who, it was kind of a joke with his friends that if this artist came over to the house, they would take a painting down because they knew he would like go and be like, can I take that back so that I can paint?
Oh yeah, totally. See, that's it. That's awesome.
So you're definitely not alone in that. And that's really funny because because when I think about it, I'm like, I was thinking as you were talking, I'm like, well, we have my paintings hanging in the house and it doesn't really bother me that much. And then I'm like, oh no, wait. Yeah. Okay.
You start looking at them.
I don't know what it is, but I switch them around, and it's not because I'm bored with the painting. It's because I can't look at it anymore because I'm just all of a sudden I hate that painting.
Yep.
That's
Can't
really
handle
funny.
it.
Yeah. My husband has to restrain me from like painting it out or doing something like, yeah. So last question for you. What advice would you give to yourself, the artist that you were 10 years ago?
Oh gosh, so many things. I think I would tell myself, just make the painting. I was always super nervous about my work and feeling like I had to know what it all meant. Now I know I know otherwise than that. I think now trying to figure out what it all means beforehand is just insane. Like you can't know what it all means. You don't know until you finish. And then even 20 years down the road, maybe you still don't know what it actually means. So it's really limiting, I think, to think that way, and probably a huge block to a lot of creative endeavors at the time. So letting myself make huge mistakes 10 years ago, I think would have been a great thing. And maybe not operating so much out of this fear of failure or fear of not knowing what it was supposed to be or mean. And I would tell myself just to make the freaking painting. Just do it.
I love it.
And just fail and let it fail, and it's fine. Like just make more. It's not a big deal. But I think that's, and that's something that I think comes down to, when we're younger artists, we're like starving. And so you're afraid of going through so much material, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I went through this place where I was like, I don't have more canvas. I can't mess up, right? I can't. Yeah, and that's so bad. It's so bad to do that, because then you just feel like you can't take chances.
Yeah.
Right? You feel like you have to make everything end up being like this perfect package at the end where it's like, here's a painting, and you never have that moment where you're just messing around and being okay with making something terrible and keep going through, multiple canvases and paint. And when you don't have the money to pay for more of it, then it doesn't let you do that. So, but now I would just be like, just make it, just do it.
Yeah.
Just make the painting.
Absolutely. It's so, and I've been there and I've felt that. And oh my God, so many stories of like what I would do to get materials in when I was in college. Like,
oh my gosh,
God, like dumping pennies out and counting them. And like, I used to waitress. So like, it was ridiculous. I would bring in rolled quarters to the art store. And it's just thinking back, it's kind of sweet, but painful to think of that. But
totally.
You're literally kind of calculating how much it kind of cost to make this painting, which is just such a buzzkill for your creativity. It's awful.
It really is. It's so limiting.
Yeah.
So limiting.
And I was just another artist I recently interviewed, this woman, Alison Gildersleeve, was talking about her sister recently just gave her a ton of giant sheets of paper, just a ton of them. And she said it was the most amazing thing because she paints, like you do, these huge paintings. And so now she had this like giant stacks of paper in her studio, and she would just go through it. Like she was kind of just trying to see like, okay, like, I can go through this and learn what I need to do about drawing. And there was nothing, it didn't have to be good. It didn't have to, there was no restrictions or none of that calculation as to how much is this costing me or anything like that. It was just almost like free reign, which is so beautiful and so free,
Yeah. Yeah.
And if we could just get that way with our, with everything when we're painting.
Yeah. Or just be more resourceful. Back in the, 10 years ago, I think if I would have just been a little bit more resourceful about materials, then maybe I would have not felt so restricted in that way. But it's in hindsight.
Yeah. Well, now you have the next 10 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Kelli, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it a lot as well.
Thanks again to Kelli for sharing her insights with the Savvy Painter community. You can find show notes for this episode with examples of Kelli's paintings, how to connect with her, and links to other artists that we mentioned at savvypainter.com/podcast. If you know another artist who would benefit from this conversation about how a year of focus painting at the Roswell residency program helped, or how Kelli makes titling a painting easy, or any of the other tips or resources, please pass this episode along. One more thing I want to let you know. This year, you can expect a lot more workshops from Savvy Painter. If you are an artist who struggles with getting painting time in or feels like you're always busy but never really moving forward with your art, then my workshops just might interest you. Past workshops include Mindset Mastery, a 5-week online workshop to help you get past the roadblocks that keep you from painting. In it, we tackle the inner critic, fears of artists, and setting yourself up for a successful creative day. The workshop, How to Develop a Relationship with the Right Gallery, helped several artists find the right gallery and show their work. So if this is something that interests you, you can go to savvypainter.com/workshop and get on the email list. This is separate from the main list that tells you when a new episode comes out. This is just for the workshop, so you don't get quite as many emails, but when you do, there's always something really good happening. Sign up now and get a downloadable PDF with case studies that tell you exactly how 3 artists pushed through barriers that were getting in the way of their studio time. You can, for example, learn how Rhonda went from not wanting to call herself an artist to getting her very first solo show. Also, listen to an introverted artist describe how she built her confidence and then spoke in front of an audience of her peers. And you can discover the tools that Samantha used to take back her power after a decade of believing that she had no, I'm putting air quotes there, she had no talent. So again, go to savvypainter.com/workshop to reserve your place on the list. When you sign up, you get that downloadable case studies that I mentioned, but more importantly, you get exclusive invites to upcoming workshops. Most of the time when I launch a new program, it sells out before I ever announce it publicly. So reserve your spot now at savvypainter.com/workshop. Until next week, this is Antrice Wood with the Savvy Painter podcast. Thank you so much for listening.